Nate, what's going on, man? Thanks
Hey,
for
buddy.
being here with me today.
Yeah. I'm glad to be here.
Facebook world, I'm introducing my friend Nate Guggia. Got it right.
You got it right.
And he is an employer branding specialist, and we are going to dig deep into that today. But before we get into the fun stuff, Nate, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at right now, and what you've got going on with life.
Okay. Let's see. So I lead brand marketing for a creative studio called Job Portraits. We're based in the Bay Area, and we're a creative studio that specializes in employer branding, which is it's a pretty unique company and industry to be in. And I think like more specifically, we serve high growth startups who are hiring really competitive technical and sales talent. It's just like the world we live in. And so that's how we see employer branding. But to kind of like take a step back from that, I think, and like how I even got into this, employer branding itself is like a pretty new thing, especially in the US. Like only over the last couple of years has it become like a household term.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time, like I started my career in the wine business in California, and then I got into finance, and kind of took me on this journey when I got into like my mid 30s, and I went through like this professional like reinvention. I wanted to get out of finance and I wanted to get into tech, and I had no background at all in like selling SaaS software. I mean, it's just like, it wasn't there. And I needed to figure out a way to like kind of get myself in the door. So that's when I came across early stage startups and realized that like early stage startups hire differently. They look for like overall experience as opposed to like specific industry experience. And it was a way for like me to kind of like get in and start like really understanding that industry. And so, I worked for a number of early stage startups as like sales hire number one, came in and like helped build out sales processes. And I ended up working for a recruiting startup based out of San Francisco. I had like no idea about recruiting. I had no background in it. I was just like a sales guy who came across like a cool opportunity and was like, oh, recruiting is kind of like sales, right?
Right.
Like, and I had gone through periods of unemployment, and I had like tons of empathy for people who are looking for great jobs. And so I was like, I just like was on this mission to do it. But long story short, that company was just like a total shit show. And like, I mean, it lasted a couple months, but because I've always been in this like sales and BD world, I was just really good at opening up new business. So I got like a look inside of the agency model. And I saw some opportunities to continue opening up new business. And so I didn't have anything else going on. And a buddy of mine is a senior tech recruiter at this like really great SaaS company who was looking for a side hustle. And so like he and I just ended up partnering, and for like a year, just like ran this like 2-man shop where I would like go out and open up new business and source. And then he would come in as like the actual recruiter and like kind of take it from there.
Right.
So that got me into the world of recruiting. But all along this time, I was still looking for like a real job. And that's when I came across Job Portraits on AngelList, because I was always looking for just like cool early stage startups to join. AngelList was kind of like my go-to source for that. And I came across Job Portraits, and I had no idea what employer branding was, but I knew that I wanted to be on the creative services side. I had this like, I was really drawn to creative agencies.
Right.
And I saw that it had something to do with kind of recruiting. So I was like, oh, like I somewhat understand recruiting. This is a creative agency. This sounds super cool. So
a little
then
crossover there for you.
Yeah. So then like that opened me up to that world. I initially did like an interview with them, number of interviews with them rather, and actually didn't get hired like right away. Like timing wasn't right. But I just like always stayed in touch with them. And then I started off as like a contractor, which quickly moved into a full-time role. And then once I got in and like really understood this world of employer branding, I became extremely passionate about it. And from there, like things like really took off. And so I've been with Job Portraits for 15 months now.
Nice.
And I'm just like really embedded now in like the world of employer branding. And yeah, I just like, I love it. I never thought I would. And I think like not having a background in it initially has like really given me this, like, I came in with like a fresh slate, like
Right.
with a fresh perspective, and was like, I don't pretend to know everything.
Right.
I just kind of see it differently.
Yeah. It's funny how so many people, going back to the recruiting, it's funny how it's like nobody really goes to school or goes to college to become a recruiter.
No.
And obviously with employer branding, you talked about it earlier, it's such a kind of a newer concept now. Nobody went to school for that either.
No.
Maybe now, I don't know what the majors are nowadays, but it's just funny how it seems like most people I talk to somehow stumble into, we'll just call it the space of talent.
Yes.
Whether you're internal, external, it's not like most people don't set out for that. Maybe HR folks, but it's funny to see how many people just kind of fall into this path. So what do you feel like are some of the key differences from the recruiting side to the employer branding side now that you're there?
Yeah. I think like, so now, like, this is what I'm most excited about, I think, when it comes to employer branding, is how these two worlds are now like starting to merge. I think they've lived in kind of like silos, whereas like where recruiting would be more of like a sales function in a way, and employer branding would be more like, let's say, marketing and branding, right? More like awareness. But I think now recruiters, because of like the current environment, like, the candidate market, and just like also too, like buyers have just changed the way that they go about looking, feeling, operating when they want to like make a purchase. And like a new job is like the biggest purchase that we could ever make.
Right.
And so I think like recruiters now are adapting to become more like marketers than just sellers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I see these worlds merging, especially when we start looking at like growth stage startups where employer branding sits super close to recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like a talent acquisition lever. And so I think like one thing that we need to do first, like with employer branding as an industry, is we need to like demystify what employer branding really is. It's a buzzy term that is like kind of fuzzy, and it can mean a whole lot of different things. And so, I mean, I think employer branding just means like, it's what candidates believe, whether it's true or not, about what it's like to work at a company.
Right.
It's their perception, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that perception exists regardless
Right.
of what you do. But even though that's mostly out of your control, employer branding is a way to start influencing that perception, and at least starting to control the conversation a little bit more, instead of just purely leaving it up to the candidate to determine what they think about this company, right?
Right.
And so I think like when you look at that and you look at it practically, what does this mean on the recruiting side? I think employer branding is sales enablement for recruiting. It makes recruiters' jobs so much easier, because now they're equipped with like content to personalize, to reach out, to get more conversations started. And so it's like, when you break it down simply, it's like sales enablement for recruiters to help recruiters have more productive, meaningful conversations,
Mm-hmm.
especially at the top of the funnel.
Right. Where do you think, like, if you were to go back, and I mean, I guess there's probably a history of all of this here, but like, is there an actual shifting turning point that we can go back to, like, hey, this is when employer branding actually became a part of the game?
So I know employer branding started like in Europe as a thing. And I think it's probably been around for 20 plus years. I mean, long time. But in the United States, if you see somebody who's been in employer branding, like specifically for 10 years, they are an industry vet. Like, it's almost like they've been in it their entire life. Right. And then when you start looking like more at like the like startup world, I mean, it's really only now starting to be paid attention to.
Right.
Because it's just like a different world, I mean, it's like, we're talking about like massive hiring goals, like hair on fire teams.
Right.
And employer branding itself isn't led by a single individual. it's usually led by like a head of talent who is also managing a team, who's also looking at strategy and all of these other things. And they kind of raise their hand and say, like, we need to start thinking about how we're branding ourselves as an employer.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's no way they can dedicate all of their time to it. So like the conversation is starting to happen, but still, most companies don't know what it really means, what it looks like, and how to execute on it. Like there's just
Right.
there's a big gap there. And I think like that's an industry problem, but at the same time, I'm really happy that conversation is happening
Mm-hmm.
because like defining it is kind of different for every company. But
Yeah. Have you read Delivering Happiness?
yes.
Yeah. So that was like my first, like after I read that, like I wasn't even actually in the recruiting industry yet myself when I was reading that. And I had another company that I had owned, but I was just blown away because then I went into Zappos's website after reading that.
Yeah.
And from my understanding, that was one of the biggest attractions for Amazon was, Zappos, one, their customer delivery model and how they were just so much more customer first with their support. But then second, they had the most comprehensive employer brand, I think at the time.
Yeah.
And even if you still go to the Zappos website, I mean, they have a whole website dedicated to, employment now. That was kind of my first exposure to it. And I think Tony Hsieh, was onto something back then with just how they were sharing their culture and all of these things that nobody was really doing transparently.
You're so right. I mean, it's like, how do you give candidates and just people in general a look inside of your culture? Like,
Mm-hmm.
How do you do it? And that's, it's so important these days because like you come across some companies and this says a lot about companies who do employer branding really well, whether it's like intentional or not. Right. When you like go to their site or you read their content or whatever it is, you can feel the vibe of the company.
Right.
It's through their language, through their tone, through their pictures, through like whatever it is. Like you're like, oh, this is what it would feel like to work as part of this company. And I think like that's really important to do because it like attracts and repels candidates. It will attract the ones who really resonate with that, and it will actually repel the ones who don't. Which is just smart marketing in general.
It's smart marketing. Yeah, I was going to say that's.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing: is like employer branding is at maybe marketing 101, maybe.
Right.
So if anybody's interested in employer branding in general, the thing to do is don't look at the employer branding industry, look at the marketing and branding industry, and follow their lead because there's many steps ahead of employer branding. And it's like the crossover is like, it's so direct, like just follow their lead and think like a marketer and this stuff all makes sense.
Right. Well, it's like the fundamentals of attraction, right?
It is,
I mean, if you can attract people to a sales funnel, then you can attract an employer or possibly employee to an employer funnel, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the things that are, important with employer branding without giving away your secret sauce? But what are some of the things like the key components of employer branding now?
Yeah. The one like, okay, so there's a couple. It's one is like getting clear on who you are as an organization.
Yep.
This is something that, especially for high growth companies, is a little tricky because a company is founded at one level and founded on certain principles with a certain mindset by specific people. And then in a very short period of time, within a couple years, that company has grown to hundreds of people, having raised a lot of money with potentially a board, with the founders not being directly involved the same way they are. And so it's very common to get to this place in a short period of time and go like, stop and look up as an organization and go like, who are we now? Like, like this identity crisis, like, wow, we're not who we were when we first started. And we're on this like rocket ship and we need to figure out who we are, because like, if you don't have intentional culture, it'll just like, it'll define itself. Right. And so I think for companies, like one, you get super clear on who you are and like what you stand for today.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to start telling that story, and you tell that story through content.
Right.
It's like employer branding. It really is. It's content marketing. Like, and when you can start telling the stories of the company itself, of leadership, and of the employees, um, that's like really where like the rubber hits the road with it. It's like, that is the execution piece that so many companies miss on, because it's not easy to pull off. But when you can pull it off, then like, think about this, like you're creating very tactical assets that your recruiters can then use in their outbound messaging. They can market it on social. It's like giving them assets to use to give candidates a look inside of the organization. And that moves from like, now you're not selling something. You're like, right. You're like marketing an opportunity. Because like, if you're reaching out to passive candidates with like who anybody recruiting tech talent is, and if you could reach out with like an engineering profile on somebody who's like very similar to like the candidate that you're reaching out to, and say like, hey, like here's an opportunity, here's a look inside the company, whatever. I mean, you just like personalize something at a level that like most recruiters aren't.
Right. Now as you explain employer branding, it is like marketing 101 essentially. It
totally is.
Yeah. It's just the basics of human attraction essentially.
Yeah.
What do you we've talked beforehand around maybe the possibility of, a recruiting agency to start maybe offering this as more of a creative type of thing. I mean, what are your thoughts? Where's the opportunity with that lie now?
Yeah. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. I'm actually really excited about it. I'm waiting for somebody to like take this idea and run with it.
Right.
Because I think on the agency side, whether you're like an independent recruiter or you do work as part of an agency, having creative capabilities and creative offerings is like, there's a huge gap in the market right now and nobody's filling that. And so one, it differentiates like your services and like makes you really stand out as like not just a seat filler, right? But there's two things like that we know. Like one, companies are thinking about employer branding but don't know what to do. And on the agency side, they're not helping out recruiters at all. They're not giving them anything to work with, and recruiters are having to like create this stuff themselves, right? Create messaging themselves, like work with like shoddy career sites, whatever. Job descriptions are a total mess, all this stuff, right? And I look at us as like us being a creative agency ourselves, like that's the type of work that we do, right? And like an agency, a recruiting agency, is already fulfilling half of the need by helping companies find the talent. But the need for content and the need for content marketing is really there. And there's no better person to create it and deploy it than the people who are helping hire the candidates, right? I just like, yeah. And you know what? I finally came across an agency who's doing this extremely well. They're based out of London. They're called Wiser, WISER. They're doing some really cool stuff. They're a full-on recruiting agency and a full-on creative services agency as well, blended into one. And they get very strategic with their clients. They help them fill recs and they help them create content. And it makes their job so much easier.
Yeah. I mean, it's speaking with a lot of recruiters, and one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get when it comes to like, attracting candidates is a lack of the ability to really get engagement. And when you think about like what the marketplace is going through is like people's information is really everywhere. So, you're getting hammered either on the phone, which isn't telling a story about anything, right? You're sending stuff to people via email, and all of these things are always going to be a part of the game. That's not the conversation, but it's when you can create an easier conversation. And when there's awareness around the opportunity and awareness around a brand, you're going to get that much more of a response, So I think the things you're hitting on of like, a lot of these recruiters that work for these companies are handcuffed because there's nothing to really promote. They just are out there digging, which for years and years and years, that's been the only way, and
Right.
it'll still be a big part of the way. But I think that there's so much opportunity with what you're doing, and if an agency decided to kind of do this in parallel, because attraction's hard. People are, whether we're talking employer branding, recruiting, marketing in general, like we're competing for attention nowadays. And that's one of the things I think people miss, is that it's not about your competition, it's about attention.
Yes.
When you think about like what's going on right now with the coronavirus, where's everybody's mind space at? It's there, right? So now you're going to go try to disrupt that. You better have a hell of a plan to disrupt that, because there's a lot of noise going on around these things. That's just an example, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things that's, a challenge that this helps solve.
Yeah, it absolutely. And because like we when I say we, I mean job portraits, because we look at employer branding as lead generation, right? That's like what it comes down to. Like, let's not like sugarcoat it and put all kinds of like buzzwords on it. Like,
yep.
It's going to like increase company culture and all this kind of stuff. All that could be true, but like really when it comes down to it, employer branding is lead generation. Who needs lead generation? Recruiters, right? And so what we see, like when we look at metrics, like, geez, man, Google employer branding metrics and you'll get like all kinds of stuff. What we see is like the two that employer branding really impacts and that actually really matter when it comes to talent acquisition is one, increase reply rates to outbound messages.
Yep.
Right? And two is increase in the number of referrals.
Yeah.
Both things that are super helpful for recruiters. And so that's just like how we look at it. And I think like when you start looking at employer branding through a content marketing lens, all of this stuff really starts to make sense.
Right? Well, it's the brand awareness, right? So many of my clients, once they, implement a lot of the things that we work on, it's the multi-channel approach that really creates, that's one of the easiest ways to cut through noise. So I might be sending you a direct email message or a message on LinkedIn, but then when they see the content in conjunction with that, that's where the awareness goes to another level that creates more engagement.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing too is like, depending on who you're recruiting for, most candidates don't know who that company is. Right. I mean, let's face it, there's only a handful of companies who like have like so much brand recognition that they are just like automatically recognizable in the market as a place that you want to go and work for. But there's a lot of amazing companies who are doing a really poor job of telling their story. And as a result, candidates just don't know they exist. Right. And so that's like another thing too, where I think like getting that brand message out consistently really helps recruiters, because by the time a recruiter does reach out, or after they reach out a couple times or whatever, a candidate goes like, oh, like I understand who these people are. Right. Again, all marketing stuff, but like, it's just not talked about that much in employer branding. But yeah, I think like, there's like, because marketing is so important now for recruiters, I think like skill sets, like being able to think and act like a marketer for one, being a creative, being a good copywriter, like, and just being a good storyteller are like just core skills that are really needed right now. I think like relationship building will always be a part of it, because like, I mean, that's like anybody who's in kind of like a sales role, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. But I think like now it's shifting because of the way that we communicate and the way that like our end user like responds. We do so much through like written communication and through video, and like, so like being able to like be a creative who can execute on this stuff is a skill set. And that's like another gap in the market. Right.
100%. It's like, I call it building relevant digital relationships. And there's still a block for a lot of people that think that the only way you can build a relationship is through face-to-face and over the phone. And so many of my relationships with my clients start off with, it's a relationship I don't even know about, but they're building a relationship with me essentially on the back end.
Yes.
That comes around, and, there ends up being a phone call and a transaction. But it's actually a relationship that's being built. It's
Yeah.
just a new way that people really sometimes haven't really grasped yet, that like this actually happens. Like people are out there going, man, I like this person, man, and this is what, I really work with a lot of my clients to help them understand and help them implement and execute, is that like you can build these relationships without ever picking up a phone. Now the game's always won there. It's, again, let's not confuse it. That's where the end goal, but all these things, whether we're talking employer branding or just marketing in general, it's really should be designed to make those phone conversations easier.
That's what it is.
Engagement easier,
Yeah. It's conversation starters. And like, okay. So this also makes me think about like the personal brand side of things. Right. Where, so like employer brand is one thing, but I think like also too, there's the big opportunity for recruiters to develop personal brands as just like thought leaders in the industry. Right. Not pitching roles, like opportunities, about just like straight up like thought leadership, and having like unique thoughts, opinions, perspectives on like the industry as a whole, or aspects of the industry. Like the more narrow you can get, the better. And it's just like over time, it's a patience game, and it's having like a long-term mindset, but over time, which actually isn't that much time, man. We're talking about like, right? Like we're talking like months of like putting in consistent work to like elevate yourself. When you have that brand awareness, by the time you do want to, like, it's like the Gary Vee thing where he says like jab, 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 right hook, right? And it's jab long enough to create enough value where people are like, oh, I trust that person and I really align with their perspective. By the time you do reach out, like doors are open. I mean, it's sure. Like I will definitely have a conversation with you. I see it happen myself, and it's pretty cool. Like when it started to click for me, I was like, oh, this is transferable all over the place.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I think you hit the nail on the head with a long game, because so many people, it's one of those things that it's going to take longer than you want, but faster than you think. Right. But so many people, kind of disrespect the process of like putting out content and trying to develop the personal brand, and think that, well, I created content for a week and I just haven't seen the results yet, and it's like, no, the market needs to see you through repetition for them to actually build the awareness around you, and then to actually start to view you as being some sort of a thought leadership. It's a process, right? But so many people are used to smile, dial, pick up the phone. How can I get results fast enough? Right. That's what they now expect the online content game to be. And it's just not that.
Right.
Now probably more than ever, given what we're going through not in our country, across the world with the coronavirus, if you were to use this time as a prime example of why you need to have an online presence.
Yes.
Nobody's actually at their desk at work anymore. There's no trade shows. There's no conferences. One thing they will be doing is they will be on their phone. They will be on the internet.
Yep.
And right now, like there's no better time to really capitalize employer branding, whatever it is. Nobody's going into face-to-face interviews right now.
No.
Right. It's all stopped. So if you're forward thinking, recruitment, entrepreneur, employer branding, having an online presence like now is probably going to prove more than ever, like that is just the most crucial thing, because this is where everybody's going to be spending their time. Like we don't even have NCAA tournament we can watch, So it's like people are going to be sedating in scrolling their feed. Like you need to be a part of it. You need to be there disrupting. You got to be doing things like this, where we're out here talking, we're sharing things, and we're doing things that maybe our competition doesn't want to do. But that's where, we're seeing here, in other cases that may not be it. If you're going with the traditional old school approach to marketing and employer branding.
Yeah. Well said, man. I think like now such a good time to like double down on helping and knowledge sharing, and like without the expectation of closing something, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And so I think like I came up with this term. I by no means created it. I just like use it a lot for myself. Like a number of months ago, I call it virtual coffee. And like, it's just like, it's a way to like talk shop about my industry. So like I do a lot of virtual coffees with people that are just like super casual, get to know them. And like, we just talk about the industry. And I think like there's a big opportunity for recruiters to have virtual coffees with like other industry leaders who they know are like-minded, to knowledge share and like upskill with like candidates who, you know, are like passive, but always maybe kind of looking to like just get their feedback on like what's going on, like get a sense of like the climate and stuff, like just intel, and just like further relationships and just like double down on that and just like, and help people who like are maybe going through a tough time. And like all of that strengthens your own brand.
Yep.
And I think it's just like super important right now. And it's a big opportunity as well.
Yeah. Well, the way I usually say it is your goal should be to create a tremendous amount of goodwill in the marketplace without any attachment to any result. Don't worry about likes, comments, views, play the game.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where so many people, if you're not playing the game and you're getting started, that's usually where we go, is like, you're always attached to the result. But like, if you're playing a long game, like we talked about earlier, look, it's what happens from one post to the next really shouldn't matter. It's the consistency, it's the showing up. And then it's coming from a place of like, you know, especially where people get hung up on like, oh, I don't want to put myself out there, I don't want to be rejected. It's like, look, I'm going to put myself out there unapologetically. And if you don't like me, you have the freedom to just move the hell on.
Yes, you do.
You know, and I also know where I'm coming from is like, I'm always coming from a place of wanting to help in goodwill, you know, and in me knowing that to my core makes it easy for me to put myself out there. I'm not worried about like, I'm not having Nate on the show here to help inspire somebody to come work with me. You know, right. It's like, no, it's because you have some value you can bring to my audience. And you're not on this show hoping that you get a client.
No.
You know, it's goodwill. It's showing up in the marketplace. People start to know who you are. And, you know, I think the more people start to really attach that and understand that it's a long game that you're playing here. And in you know, society's kind of taught us to think that, oh, well, if you're not getting all the likes and the loves, then it's not worth your time. Right. And that's not where it's at. And especially when we look at the audiences that we both deal with, and yours probably even more than mine, is they're sophisticated. Yeah. So they're not sitting around all day long necessarily liking, commenting, engaging. It's not meaning they don't see your stuff, but they're not the person that's going to go, oh yeah, let me go ahead and start dialogue with that. Like, not if you're trying to attract and work with the CEO.
You're bringing up, oh man, okay, this was on my mind like 5 minutes ago, and you're bringing it up now. I was amazed at how many people see my content that have never engaged with it. Mm-hmm. Like I've gotten emails from like prospects who I just like stay in touch with, who are like, they'll like, I'll reach out to them, be like, hey, like you want to jump on the phone or something? And they'll write me back and we'll be like, by the way, like I'm loving all your content on LinkedIn. And I'm like, Jesus, you never even,
never even knew it
one time.
Yep.
Yeah. And so like, there's so much more awareness than we even know. Mm-hmm. And that's like, back to what you were saying, like, that's why it's so important to just show up, and the consistency, and then like your content gets better and your message gets more defined, and like the whole thing like starts evolving. It's just like working out, you know, it's like, it's a muscle. And then next thing you know, you're like 5-6 months in and you have a level of audience, and like people are paying attention to you. And like, it's just like, it's smart business for one. And two, it is like, it creates career opportunities.
Oh yeah.
Like crazy one, you know, I mean, like stuff comes out of it. And so I think it's smart on both fronts, but
yeah, I think it's such a good point you bring up with that, you know, as we're going back and forth here, is like the first time I launched one of my funnels, like I was looking at all the stuff. I'm like, gosh, like what a loser I am. Like there's no likes, there's no, you know, this is a couple of years back, and then it was like, then the phone calls started to come in. And just like you're saying, is like, hey man, I saw your video, man. It's like, I want to be like, dude, why don't you write it? Give me a little love, dude. Like, yeah. But it's, you know, it is. I mean, there's so much more awareness going on that we really give credit to. And it's so important to remember that, because if not, then you'll get demoralized by your effort. Right.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah. You know, and that's where like I see so many people like come in, they're like, oh yeah, this is cool, and then they drop off because they don't see a result sometimes, like yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's, you know, with what, you know, it's funny, like our world's going in one way, like, hey, if I want to order some toilet paper, I can get it, Amazon will have it on my doorstep tomorrow.
Yes.
I literally get diapers every day, all the time with my with my new one from Amazon. So hey, if I want it, I can get it now. But like what we're talking about is not that necessarily, right? It's
not that.
We're not trained that way. It's a longer game that takes time to build up and actually build brand awareness. And it's like always reminding people that like, are you trying to have a business next month, or are you trying to have a business next year and in the years to follow? Because a lot of these things now, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but this isn't like, some people still view this as being an option. Not an option anymore.
Yeah.
Like to put yourself out there and to have a digital brand and have internet marketing presence and have an employer brand.
Yeah.
That's probably a strong statement you could start making in your market. I'm sure you are, that like having an employer brand, if you don't have one now, you're going to lose out.
Yeah, you will. Because like the thing that like with candidates, I say that candidates and employees are the influencer marketers of the talent space, right? They talk, and they talk a lot. And so what do you want them to be saying?
Right.
And I think like I had a question, somebody commented on my post today, and they said, is it better to have zero brand awareness or negative brand awareness? And I said zero, because that's just marketing. You can create awareness through marketing. And that's actually the world that like most startups are living in right now. Like nobody knows who they are. So it's like, they're all kind of on the same level. A negative brand is really hard to come back from. And there's some who don't ever come back from it. Right. And so it's the employer brand is being created. It's important to tell the story that you want to tell, so candidates know who you really are. Anyway, and I see like, I see recruiters as like the best storytellers for an employer brand, because they're at the front lines talking to the candidates. They know what candidates want. They know what they're looking for. They know what their motivations and their drivers are. They can create really compelling content that speaks directly to those things, because they're the ones having the actual conversations, right? It's like, it's easy to sit on the outside at a company or at an agency and go like, oh, here's the story you need to tell. But the people who know the story to tell are the ones having the conversations every day. And those are the recruiters. And so I think like there's a big opportunity for recruiters to like get a seat at the table that they've long needed, actually. And to kind of like start shifting the mindset and the perception around the industry as a whole. And I think like the way to do that, and where the gap is right now, is by bringing a creative marketing element to the whole thing. I think it completely shifts it.
So in your best way of, how would you suggest somebody to like, that's a recruiter, that's not even necessarily creative, like how would they go down this path?
Yeah. So the first way, like if anybody is inclined to do this, right, because you should definitely explore it. And there's going to be plenty of people who aren't, and that's okay too. But if you are, like the way to start doing it, like from a very like tactical level, is like we know there's a couple core pieces of content to create. Like content is like, what the hell does it mean, right? Can mean a whole lot of different things. But I think like to start off with, like written content is like the lowest lift. It's the easiest to implement, and it's the most versatile piece of content that you can use. Once you start getting into video and things like that on an employer branding side, that's like a different element that takes a whole lot of thought and storytelling ability. But I think like employee profiles, which is basically like looking at like what are the key hiring roles for an organization, and then finding the culture holders that represent the type of candidate that you're looking to attract. And as a recruiter, listing out the questions that you're getting asked over and over on screening calls from candidates, that will give you an indication of what candidates actually care about. Like companies need to stop telling the stories that like they care about and tell the stories that they know their candidates care about. Right. And so list out those like top 5 to 7 questions or whatever. Take those, interview key culture holders in those main hiring roles, and write a Q&A blog post that tells that person's story and answers all those questions. And now what you have is you have a candidate FAQ as an employee profile that when you reach out and a candidate reads that, one, they're seeing somebody who's like doing like the day in the life of that organization, who is like represents on some level who they are, and is actually answering all the questions that they're thinking about. That's the easiest way to like start doing it.
That's great.
I think employee profiles, like, I'm a big advocate of them. A lot of companies do them wrong, and the way to do them right is to have deep empathy for your candidate and answer their questions. Like, right. And so I think like, and another thing too, I mean, there's like other pieces of content, like core, like evergreen type content that can like have a long shelf life. But like, if anybody is interested and they're like, whoa, like maybe this is something I can run with, or maybe like our agency can run with this or whatever, like I'm down to like download whatever I have onto them so they can like potentially go with this, because I'm excited for somebody to do this. I'm just like waiting for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very gracious of you too.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to help. I love talking about this stuff. And like, I guess on some level, like maybe it would be like a competitor to us, but like, I don't even like think that way. It's like, I want somebody.
There's plenty in this world.
Yeah, man. Like I really want somebody to take this and like, and just do this like recruiting creative hybrid.
Well, I think that there's, from the recruiting agency side, I think that there's such an opportunity to use something like this to get that engagement, to get a retainer, to get exclusive, because you're not going to obviously do this as a contingent recruiter.
Right.
But now I've got you, hey, what is part of your package? Well, hey, we're going to do this, and this is going to require, it makes the whole selling of an engagement or a retainer that much more attractive for the employer, because before it was just, hey, for me to fill these roles. Now it's to build your brand ongoing and fill the roles. Which is so much more impactful, more revenue first and foremost. But beyond that, you're going to be able to create a much better result for your organization.
It's a
sticky. In fact, I had somebody in this group the other day post that their company is all retained, and every time they partner with a company, they go completely take over their Facebook page.
Really?
Yeah, which I thought was brilliant.
So smart.
Yeah, because then now they're essentially doing employer branding. They're have access to that page, and they're being able to drive the roles that way, which I think, again, for a prospective candidate, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but I would think it's probably a lot easier for you to just go right into the company that you want to work for rather than going through a recruiter. Right. If I knew, even though I'm going to still deal with a recruiter, there's a perception that, I'm working directly with XYZ company, not through some third party recruiter. So I think that'll probably, release some of that restriction around working with recruiters.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, like, there's like a lot of ways to like chop this stuff up. But yeah, like, again, like I'm down to have conversations about this. And then like another thing I thought of too, there's a couple recruiters that like I interact with a lot on LinkedIn who I think are doing a really good job of like branding themselves. Ryan,
throw a couple names out there.
Yeah. Ryan Perez. Okay. Right? I think Ryan the recruiter. Yeah, Ryan does.
I actually interacted with him today too.
Did you? Cool. Yeah, he does a good job. Amy Ballas. Do you know Amy?
I think I know the name.
She's like a sales specific recruiter. She has a really strong brand. And then Madison Butler. Madison, she was an in-house recruiter. I think she goes by like the blue haired recruiter. She was an in-house recruiter. She's actually recently become like a head of talent. And I credit her career progression to her brand. Her brand is huge. Like she has really established herself as like a defining voice around like specific topics in the world of like recruiting and talent and culture. So anyway, like those are three people who I think are really doing a great job.
And I think you brought it up earlier in the podcast, and it's something I don't even think about because I'm always focused on working with the entrepreneurs. But one of the things you brought up is, when you understand marketing, you're going to create a hell of a lot more value around your potential career opportunities because of the brand you've built for yourself.
Yeah.
And you may not even be a business, but you've built a personal brand that now an employer looks at and goes, yeah, that's exactly who I want. And I think that's even going to continue to transform more and more. I know there's a lot of recruiters out there that help, obviously get a candidate's, LinkedIn dialed in and things like that. But thought leadership from people that don't even have their own business is going to be huge moving forward.
I mean, I think that a company would hire somebody because of their network and their reach, like their level of influence. Like,
right.
Like there's people who have more influence over their audience than a company has over their customer.
Yep.
And like, I mean, seriously, like it is so valuable for a company to snatch up somebody who has like a high level of influence because like they are a huge marketing channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it's like, it's really appealing.
Yeah. I don't know if you know who, she was on my show before. Her name's Tabitha Kavanaugh, but she's,
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, she's another
one. She
very
like,
similar. Yeah. Very similar to yourself. Your brand is a huge reflection of you personally, but then you're also working for another company. And her company, I believe her employer, Scott McGregor, is the guy.
Yes, Scott.
But yeah, so they've got like their whole team. You watch everything that they do. I mean, all of them, they just interact and they've got these personal followings. I mean, they're doing it right when it comes to just, branding in general.
they're a really great example of, of how to do it. And it's like, you can just tell like with Scott too, like with his content, like the mindset at the top, man, it's like, it really starts there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Exactly. And then trickles down.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. So what's kind of the most, thing you're most excited about, for your business moving forward right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like for our business personally, we've started doing these, like, we call them 90-minute employer branding jam sessions. It's the thing I'm most excited about right now. We rolled it out a couple months ago because what we realized after doing this for like 5 or 6 years, that people just like don't know where to start.
Right.
Like I talked about at the very beginning is like, what does employer branding mean? How do we define it at our company? Like, and how do we like execute on this very tactically so we can start producing the results that we want? And so we started doing these like complimentary, like 1.5-hour calls with talent leaders and just like seriously jamming with them about all things employer branding. And like, we go in and we like audit their employer brand from the outside because we've done tons of UX research with candidates on the market. So we know what candidates care about. So we'll audit their employer brand, present those findings, and then just have them like tell us everything they're thinking about. And then we come back and just tell them if it'll work, how to execute on it and stuff. And they've been extremely valuable. Like we're having a blast doing them. And so like I partnered with our co-founder on those. So
that's awesome. How have those been going good, duo?
They've been wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great. Like, it's like we've always had like a bit, like our business has always been built on like inbound and warm referrals.
Right.
And we ran a little bit of outbound, and like for our buyer, we're like, it's the best way to do it is to like just start conversations and develop relationships. And so like, this is like what we moved to as a way to like start doing that. And so, yeah, the response has been great.
That's awesome, man.
So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Well, how can everybody that's listening, how can they reach out? How can they find Nate?
Yeah. So I'm really active on LinkedIn.
Yep.
So you can find me there. You can message me if you want. And then Nate@jobportraits.com if you want to shoot me an email. But happy to have a conversation. Like I'm just down to like talk to like-minded people.
Yep. Yeah. If you're not following Nate on LinkedIn, you got to do that now. He's putting out some real good content.
Thanks.
So you got a good lead to follow there if you're doing that. And it's Guggia is spelled Guggia if you're listening in. So
yeah.
But take a look at him on LinkedIn. Nate, thanks for being here, man. What's one last piece of advice that you can give our audience today?
Yeah, I just want to go back. I can't stress like thinking like a marketer enough. I think it's like, think like a marketer instead of a seller. It's the modern buying process now. It's like, that's how recruiters adapt. And I think like when you can start doing that, it just changes like the whole approach to things. So that's my
Beautiful.
tip. All right, man.
Beautiful, man. Love it. Well, thank you everybody for listening in. Nate, we will talk to you soon. Everyone else, I'll see you in the next live. I've got another live coming up here in the group on Tuesday with my good friend, Bobby Bluford. Bobby used to he was my personal trainer before I went to play football at the University of Nevada. And we're going to talk about how to sneak in a workout with your busy lifestyle as a professional. So, Nate, thanks again, man. Everyone else, we'll talk to you next week.